Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Global Education's virtual expo in September. I can't believe it's already September. Time has just flown by. We know it's a Friday evening. We know you're all itching to have that Friday relaxation. I know it's still some COVID restrictions in South Africa and Zimbabwe, so we all hope that you are keeping safe. We've got an interesting webinar and presentation for you today. It's one of our key partners in Scotland. We're very proud and very happy to support them as well. They do a lot of work in the region as well, not just through Global, but through other agents themselves. They're very active. We work with Candice. Candice is our partner at the university. She helps sort of guide our students in the application process, what they should be looking out for. We work on a day-to-day basis with her as well. So you're in for a real treat. And as always, some tips about how to actually apply and get in as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Candice. The floor is yours, Candice.
Appreciate that, George. It's probably one of the best introductions I've had. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for your time. And again, agree, it's Friday afternoon. I will try to keep this interactive. I've got it kind of broken up so that I don't just sit and talk at you, that I'll be able to kind of take questions. And so you actually get something out of it as I'm going through what I'm going to present to you. So my name is Candice Aldrich. I'm the regional manager for South Asia, Middle East, and Africa at the University of St. Andrews. So that's helping students from that region, that's working with agents, that's working with nonprofits and scholarship providers and all kinds of things to support that student journey, whether you're undergraduate, postgraduate, everything. So what I'm going to do is I'll talk today about university systems. So what you may know about 3-year systems, you know about the US 4-year system. Some of you may know Scotland is also 4 years, but it's a little bit different than the US 4-year system. And obviously you've got that extra year compared to the 3-year system in the rest of the UK and a lot of other places. So I'll kind of talk about how that's different and how that then impacts your application, and what we look for on the application and your personal statement and things like that. So I'll go ahead and share my slides and get started with that. And for those of you hoping for a Scottish accent, I apologize. I am from the US originally. So again, I'll be able to share that insight. I did my undergraduate studies in the US and I did my master's in Scotland. So I've studied on both sides too. And so glad to get into any kind of nitty gritty questions about our classroom. How is the classroom experience different? That sort of thing as we go through this. So Scotland, I am quite biased. I am living my dream. I've been obsessed with Scotland since I was a teenager, which is a long time, just to give you an idea about how old I am. So I am quite biased. It is a wonderful place to live. Several universities to choose from based on the kind of experience you're looking for. Obviously, I'm coming from the University of St. Andrews. We're a campus-based experience, but you've got the big ones like Edinburgh and Glasgow. University of Edinburgh is where I did my master's. So it's very different experiences. All of them will have the unified Scottish culture, which is quite warm, it's quite accepting. It's very easy. It's a very easy place to integrate and feel like you actually become part of the community you're living in, not just a foreign student studying at that university. And I say that as, having spent the time in Edinburgh, which is the capital city, the larger city. So it's a unique kind of place where even big cities feel like small, close-knit communities. And a lot of that goes back to sort of the culture, the Scottish people. UK is quite well connected, so it's just a point we make. A lot of people feel like if you're not in one of these, if it's not London, you can't get there. It's impossible to get there. So we do just kind of like to see, actually, Edinburgh isn't an international airport. You can get anywhere in the world from Edinburgh, and Edinburgh is 45 minutes away from where Edinburgh Airport is 45 minutes away from where St. Andrews is. So going back to the degree systems. So again, you've got the US model. It's a 4-year system. You may go in undeclared. You may not pick anything to start with at all. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Everybody takes a core curriculum, what are called general education requirements. So it doesn't really matter the subject area that you're interested in. And that's reflected when you're starting. And that's reflected in how you apply, because personal statements tend to focus on why you want to be a student at that university, because you'll sort out the subject, what your major is going to be at a later time. Kind of on the other end of the spectrum is that 3-year system. you do start with something and you're pretty much locked into it. It can depend on the university and the program if you're able to kind of customize it a bit, maybe change to a joint or something like that. But by and large, it's 3 years and it's much more focused. So the US can be a system that works really well for people who have generally no idea what they want to do. They're equally interested in both sciences and humanities. And so they need that kind of breadth to be able to explore multiple subject areas before they have to narrow down. And then likewise, the 3-year system works really well for people who know exactly what they want to do. They want to be very focused and specialized from the beginning, and again, also be done in 3 years. And then the Scottish model sort of sits in between that. It is 4 years like the US system. You do pick a subject or a major to start with, like you would in the 3-year system. But because there's that extra year at the beginning, that 4th year, you're able to add in complementary subjects that you can then also explore and then potentially change. So you could start with one subject and switch to a joint degree. You finally graduate in a joint degree. You can start with one subject and finish with something completely different. The biggest difference is going to be that cross between the sciences and humanities. We don't have that kind of core curriculum where everybody takes a little bit of everything. So you typically come in the Scottish 4-year system as either a science student or humanities student. And what you explore is within that track. It doesn't mean you can't take the odd class from the other track, come in as a science student and pick up a modern history course or something like that. But you wouldn't have a degree that combines those subjects. When I started my undergraduate degree in the US, I was going to do chemistry with international relations, to give you an idea. So you couldn't do that sort of thing in the Scottish system in terms of crossing the sciences with the humanities. So in the example of St. Andrews, this is how we divide our subjects. We call them faculty or family of subjects. You've got all of the arts, which are some of them are the obvious ones. It's English, modern history, film studies. Sciences are some of them are fairly obvious too: computer science, biology, chemistry. And then we do have what we call cross faculty, which are subjects that what you learn in that subject is exactly the same, but the other subjects you take will be different based on which track you pick. So psychology is a really good example of that, in the sense that what you learn in psychology will not be different, whether you pick the humanities psychology or the science psychology. But if you pick science psychology, then you're going to take psychology with biology and computer science. If you pick humanities, it'll be film studies, modern history, social anthropology. The psychology doesn't change, but the other subjects you take with it do, based on the track that you pick when you apply. So here's another kind of example. This person applied for ancient history, added Spanish and philosophy in their first year, liked that combination. So at the end of the first year, they kept those subjects through to the second year, and then ultimately stayed with ancient history. Conversely, same example, but they actually end up dropping ancient history, even though that's what they were admitted for, and went from a single subject to a joint and 2 other subjects than what we admitted them for. So it's just another example of what I'm describing with the Scottish model. For chemistry, you tend to start narrowing down after the first year. This person applied for biology, added chemistry and statistics, and then at the end of the second year had to pick 2, picked biology and statistics together, then chose to specialize in marine biology. And this is also another example of what we call umbrella subjects. So the person just applied to general biology and then picked their specialty. You can also pick the specialty and start from there in the beginning. So it'll just depend on kind of what you want to study, what you want to focus on, and what you think your interests are. So I'll stop. That was a whole lot of information about a whole nation university system. So is everything looking okay right now, George?
So I've got a question for you. Who started the 4-year process first? Was it the Scots or the Americans?
It was the Scots. Harvard actually copied it, and that's where the 4-year system in the US came from. But again, it has evolved to a fundamentally different system, particularly around the US liberal arts approach will involve that core curriculum of the general education requirements, where everybody takes a little bit of everything. Because ultimately all the university systems in any country are building off the secondary school system. And in the US, you don't start to narrow, when you get to whatever year 10, year 11. So it was a harsh reality for me when my son did it here, because I'm not used to weeding out subjects when you're 15, 16 years old, but that happens in a lot of places, particularly things like the A levels and the Scottish high school system. So that's where it comes from. But yeah, we started it first. Yeah.
I've got a question that's just come through here from Almarie. Almarie, thank you very much for your question. She says, do you think Scottish universities also pose a good option for people unsure about what they want to study?
Yeah, it's a good system for people that know they're a science student, but they're not sure if it's biology or chemistry. They're not sure if maybe they like the idea of psychology with computer science. You start getting into human and technology interactions and things like that, or so it works well. I think someone who has generally no idea, or they're so interested in a broad range of subjects, they might struggle because they will have to kind of pick one of those tracks. They will have to decide if they're a science or a humanities student. So it does work well if you know you're a science student. You definitely know you don't want to be taking modern history and social anthropology, but you're not quite sure within the sciences, and so you want to be able to explore more. So again, it really depends on where the student's coming from and what they're trying to get out of the university experience.
I've got a question. So, Almarie, this is probably going to be a little bit for you as well. When Global's counseling, especially a high school student that's looking to find out where's the place to study, what they should study in their school classroom, what they should be preparing for in the course of application, when looking at Scottish universities, the undergrad, is it kind of like the foundation, and then you would do your master's as the topper? Is that kind of like a good example to look at Scottish universities, Candice? Or is it the undergrad a lot more targeted with that 4-year approach, in the 3rd and 4th year? If you could just go a little bit in.
Yeah, so these are honors programs. So the first 2 years is where the breadth is, and then the 3rd and 4th year is where the depth is. And the students will go quite deeply into their subject areas in the year 3 and 4. You start to get into some of the history behind the 4-year model. I'm also starting to touch on why some of the schools in the UK call their humanities degrees MAs, even though they're undergraduate degrees. You start going back 500-600 years, the French tradition of 4-year programs, what they call them master's programs, because in that 4th year, our undergraduates, the Scottish undergraduate system, that 4th year, you're producing a dissertation. Most of the credit coursework that the students do is actually research-based, and it's not classroom-based. So you're still going to have that depth that depending on what you do in the US might be slightly different, because not a lot of undergraduate degrees in the US will lead to a dissertation or a thesis that you do at the end of it. It's not to say there's not research involved with it. But there is kind of this element of that advanced research that's part of the undergraduate experience that you do in the 3rd and 4th year. So there is that depth of study that will come, but the master's would then be taking it even to a more advanced level if you stayed on and did a postgraduate degree. And that would probably be even more niche at the postgraduate level. But it is to say that the 3rd and 4th year would be more advanced, more specialized, because by that point you've made your decision. And that's when you go deeply into that subject or the subjects that you've picked, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does. And I think it's so valuable especially for high school students to start thinking early about all of this. It really will dictate as well their career choices. And at the end of the day, you want to study what your passion is and what you want to do well and work the rest of your life.
Well, and that's it, and it's again, it depends on the student. It depends on where they think they want to go, what they want to get out of it. We see increasingly, it's not just the degree subject, but what's on the diploma. It's the soft skills they've built up over their years. We've had students that reference that say, I applied to management, I finished in management, but I took 3 modules of sustainable development, and that's that informed the trajectory I used my management with, even though that's not what's on their degree. And then you also factor in internship experience and things like that you do around your studies. And so that's where, again, depending on what the student's trying to achieve, and it's hard to be strategic when you're 17 and 18 years old, because there's still so much you're learning. And that's where understanding all these different degree university options are there. Because I can tell you, coming from the US, I didn't even know other university systems existed. It was a long time ago when I did my high school system, but it's just knowing that there are those options based on where the student's coming from and what they're trying to achieve with their education.
Yeah, I think that's all the questions for now.
Okay, well, I'll go on. So going a little bit into sort of studying at St. Andrews, this is our quintessential concrete library. I feel like every university has one of these. Inside's all modern. There's a cafe, really good study spaces and things like that. But it's yeah, I feel like everybody's got one. So this is St. Andrews, right on the water. It's, although it is frigid, it's the North Sea compared to the oceans you may have in South Africa. But this makes it look bigger than it really is. The whole town's about 3 miles. So very walkable, very safe. This was actually the first place of all the places I've lived that I felt like I truly felt settled. My son was 9 and I would just send him out within 2 weeks of us moving to St. Andrews. I just sent him out and he'd go play. And I didn't feel like I had to be able to, keep him in my line of vision or things like that. So it's quite safe, quite easy to get around, lots of public transportation options. So you don't have to have you don't have to drive or things like that. So it's just a neat little view to kind of show you what it looks like. Our approach to learning is a blended approach between lectures and small group, or what we call tutorials, labs if it's sciences. But it's this idea that you have, maybe a larger group. It really can depend on the year and the subject that you're studying. But you have, lecture in terms of information dissemination, and then small group discussion groups, lab works, where it's a bit more sort of practical and applied, and you're actually going into the information you learn in the lectures. Depending on the subject, in the first year, lecture might be 100 people, tutorial or a lab might be 12. But again, when you get to year 3, 4, lectures are probably going to be about 12 people, and your small group will be 3 or 4. As you have specialized, your learning experience will continue to specialize as well. All of our coursework, all of our teaching from year 1 is all done by our professors. And so students have an opportunity to work directly with the leading researchers from the beginning, as opposed to only being able to do it once they get to the postgraduate level, or only being able to do it once they get to that 3rd or 4th year. There is a lot of independent work. That's likely not something that's any surprise to most of your students. In the Scottish sense, independent is a bit almost like self-steering, not self-teaching, but there's an ownership expectation that, by the time you get to university, you pick the subjects you're going to study, and you're the one who then decides where you're going to focus. The professor is giving you the lectures, they're giving you the overview of the subject matter, and then you're the one who decides when you've done enough. You're the one who decides the areas within that you want to focus on. And in the end, it's quite liberating, but it can be kind of take some getting used to. And by and large, all the students we see coming from South Africa plug into that really well. They do quite well with the expectations for independent work, critical thinking, and that sort of thing. But again, sometimes it just takes a getting used to. Even the US students coming over sometimes struggle with that a bit. But there is, you continuously assess. You don't just have end of semester exams and that's it, or end of year exams. You've got research projects, papers, midterms, finals. So you'll have a way to know how you're doing. If you think you're doing fine, and then actually your assessments show maybe you need some more support or spend some more time in the library and that sort of thing.
One of the things, Candice, that stuck out for me since I've joined Global, listening to feedback of students from studying in Scotland in terms of the support services, and that, if they're struggling, the types of level of support that's around them, the help in learning how to study, how to take notes, and I just find that it's a lot more positive, especially from a lot of the Scottish partners, specifically St. Andrews, the one student that I've counseled that's gone there as well. It's really important that I think parents, especially parents, are aware of it. So when you're sending your child across to a new country, you've always got that fear of it as well. And in terms of the access to that level of support, how does that work? Is it like a portal? Is there like a building? You could just sort of go a little bit into the detail.
Yeah, definitely. It's multifaceted, to be honest. And we get as close to hand holding as I think you can get in Europe. And I say that coming from the US, where they hold hands even more, in the sense that there's always events, there are always things being organized, there's classes and workshops and There's things that the student government will organize. Then there's things that the student services department will organize. There's things the career center will organize. And you're absolutely right. It's one thing to say, go study biology. It's another thing to know how to take notes, know what to do with your notes, know how to have an organizational system to go back and use the notes when you're revising. So there's those kind of basic skills that the student service department will organize workshops. We have a professional development team, and they'll organize how to do Excel pivot table kind of workshops, as well as research presentation for academic audiences kind of workshops. There are some of those, there are portals. The student has their own, we call it MySane, it's a student login. They can go in and sign up for those kind of workshops. The student service team has a front-facing office. It was one of the few offices that stayed open through lockdown, where you can literally just walk in and say, I'm having trouble finding an adapter for my hair dryer, or I haven't been able to get through to my parents on Skype and I'm starting to feel really homesick, or my professor is not answering their emails and I'm struggling with this topic area, whatever it is, they're there to help. So you can literally just walk in. So there's that level of support. There's, of course, there's email, we use Microsoft Teams, so there's ways that you can message people, instant message people. And then again, there's the student login portal, again, what we call MySaint. Most of it, I think, is an Outlook or Microsoft-based system. And that's how they could sign up for their classes. That's how they connect with their advisors, all kinds of things. And then there's the student services and the student life side. So the student government, student union, because they'll organize events. They have the clubs, they have regular meetings. The students can engage with them directly. We've got an informal level of support that we call academic families, which is it's a buddy system at a basic level. You come in as a new student, you get adopted by upperclassmen, but it translates to a really strong alumni network, and it is an integral part of how, particularly for the undergraduate students, how they are supported and folded into the student community when they arrive. And that all happens organically. It's by and for the students, has been for centuries. The university staff don't organize it. The students do it themselves. And when every student gets to their third or fourth year, they just know it's their turn to look after the next batch coming in. And everybody stays in touch. Any alumni I've ever met is still in touch with their parents who adopted them and the children who they adopted 2 years, 3 years later. So it's a real integral part, so that there's the formal support, whether it's student services, whether it's the staff living in the dormitories, in the halls, and then you've also got this informal support, peer to peer. Everybody's just trying to look out for each other. So George, like you said, it's the very sort of basic support, needing help taking notes, to sort of more kind of critical support, whether it's mental health, well-being, academic support, that sort of thing.
Candice, I've got a question here from Marlene, who's joined us. Marlene, thank you very much. It's a course-specific question as well, Candice. How many years is the undergrad medical degree and specialization thereafter? So I think we could just go a little bit into that.
So what I just presented doesn't apply to medicine. It only applies to the traditional undergraduate system. So medicine is a 6-year program at St. Andrews. You do your first 3 years at St. Andrews and you get a BSc in medicine. And then for the international students, you then typically progress on to the University of Manchester and you get an MChem from the University of Manchester, and that's 3 years. So it's a 6-year program. If you were to stay on in the UK, there's a test you take, and then you become part of the national healthcare system and start what we would call residencies in the US, where you're being supervised and things like that. How that would work coming back into South Africa, I could help find out. That part I'm not entirely sure, but we do have students who will come in and do the 6 years and then go in other places, including the US, Malaysia, India, to practice medicine there. But then when you get to other countries, there's obviously their own requirements and things like that. There is a standardized test students have to take before they start medicine in the UK at any university. It's called the UCAT. So in addition to whatever qualifications they're presenting in their application, they also have to take the UCAT as part of their, when they apply, they have to have taken it at the time that they submit their application. So there's that angle too, in terms of testing and that kind of thing.
Marlene, just to add to what Candice was saying as well, global education in South Africa and Zimbabwe, they both get really involved in these discussions, especially with medical students and finding out where the best place for them to study, but also when they come back to their country, or if they stay in their country, or if they go internationally and do residency in another country as well. So please do get in touch with us. I'm more than happy to get that information across to you as well as sharing Candace's contact details with you as well. Candace, that's I think all the questions for this section.
Okay. So applying, coming in as international students, they can pick one of three ways. There's the UK system, which is called UCAS. We are on the Common App. So if you have students that are kind of looking at a mix of UK and US schools, they could consider the Common App. And then obviously, if there's just the one university they want to apply to, they can just apply directly on our website. We don't prioritize one route over the other. So it's whatever makes the most sense for the student. There is, many of you may know there's the UCAS rule of 5. For students who are in the UK, they're not to apply to more than 5 institutions. And so UCAS will only allow students to apply to 5. And so generally what we tell international students is, to stick with that rule of 5. So if they're also considering the Common App because they're looking at US schools, if it's just 1 or 2 schools in the UK and they're all on the Common App, it's fine to use the Common App. But if any of the schools in the UK that they're going to apply to are not on the Common App, then use UCAS, put all of the UK schools on that, and then keep the Common App separate. So that way you kind of still stay around that kind of rule of 5 that UCAS has. But it's, I'm glad to take any questions. And again, we don't prioritize, so whatever makes the most sense for the student. Obviously, we'll look at grades and any other kind of testing or things like that they have. The way my team works in terms of being all over the world, understanding all the different curriculums, we do quite well with blended curriculums. So students that maybe did GCSEs and then switched to NSC, or did IB and then switched to A levels, or things like that. Or maybe they were at a US school and then they came to an IB school the last 2 years because their parents moved to South Africa for work or something like that. So you can take that kind of blend. Likewise, if you've got students that are doing NSC, but they've been taking SATs and APs because they're looking at US schools, we can take that too. Having that kind of extra testing wouldn't necessarily make them more competitive, but it could meet prerequisites depending on what they're applying to. And it could also make the difference between a conditional or an unconditional offer. If they're presenting several tests, plus they've got really strong scores and they're predicted to get really good, so that's the kind of thing that we can explore. So it's very holistic in that sense. It's based on what the student presents to us. Obviously, we'll look at the reference. The reference is very important because it obviously gives us further insight to who the student is, both as a person and as a student, what their academic interests are. It's a really good place to put in extracurricular or extenuating circumstances if the student doesn't want to take up space in their personal statement, or the supplementary statement if it's the Common App. When it comes to the personal statement across all the UK, the personal statement is really important because you are picking something, the student is picking something to start with. And again, going back to what I said with that first slide, in the US, you can be undeclared, you don't have to pick something. So the statement's more about you wanting to be at that university. Whereas for St. Andrews, for the UK, you are picking something to start with. And so we need to understand why you picked that subject or those subjects to start with. If you're using UCAS and you've got maybe PPE at one university and international relations at St. Andrews, you don't want to say, I want to study PPE because that's not what you're applying to for us. And so it becomes sort of an art form to really start to look at the themes of the different subject areas based on what they call it at different universities. What are the themes that unite those? And what is your interest as it connects to that? And so that way you don't have to say, I want to study international relations when you apply to PPE at another university, but you can talk about how international institutions, trade agreements influence government behavior. I'm just pulling out random things with international relations. But you start getting into those kind of themes and those kind of areas within the subject areas. And that's what you talk about. And then that way it's clear, regardless of what the subject might be called at any given university, then it's clear why you've picked that subject without you having to say, this is what I want to study. But again, for us, we're going to look at it holistically. We're going to look at all of these points, qualifications, reference, and personal statement. And so for us, it's never just about grades because that reference and that personal statement will also get factored into it. So you can have to use Indian terminology, the topper at your school But if the personal statement talks about the beaches and, the Quidditch Society and doesn't talk about their academics at all, that's going to be factored into the decision we finally make on that application.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Candace,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Just with that, just from the top of my head here, with the pandemic that's happened across the whole world, and a lot of university applications ask for extracurricular activities, volunteer work and things like that. If students have done things online, where a lot of high schools in South Africa, for example, who've had these like community programs online, sort of group work and things like that, would that count in an application? Could you put that on as extracurricular activities?
Absolutely. And again, I think it depends on how it relates to the subject. So where you put it, if it's super curricular, extracurricular things that you were doing that directly relate to your academic interest, by all means. My only caution would be, don't just list it. Explain, I did this because, I'm really interested in how, again, government to make decisions or whatever it is, based on whatever the subject is, but explain the connection for us. And if it's super curricular, extracurricular, and it doesn't necessarily relate directly, but you want us to know, that's where the reference can come in and talk about those things. So we absolutely want to see that kind of information, because then that gives us the full picture of the student, how they manage their time, the kind of things that they're interested in. And so again, it just sort of depends on where it goes in the application. But just to say, we don't penalize if you don't have extracurriculars listed in the application. Because again, it's about your interest in the subject area. So you're not going to be penalized. The exception would be medicine, although there's an exception to that because of COVID. Medicine typically looks for hands-on experience. And I say that as opposed to something like shadowing. In pre-COVID times, there's been flexibility of what they would take in terms of that kind of experience, demonstrating that kind of experience since COVID happened, because obviously a lot of people, hospitals weren't letting students come through and walk around and that kind of thing. So so it's a little bit different right now based on what we'll take, but typically we would look for something, whereas for all the other subject areas, we have students who apply and they never mention extracurricular. They just really go into why they're interested in physics or whatever, biology, marine biology, whatever it is. And that's what we're looking for. So it's okay to not have anything, or it's okay to not mention anything. But likewise, if you do, use the personal statement for stuff that relates or that further supports your academic interests, and then the reference could also be a place where other things are listed.
Pro tips there. Those are some serious pro tips for anybody listening in on that.
And always glad to go into that more in terms of what we see. I can do workshops and show you examples and things like that. These are just the deadlines. UCAS does have an equal opportunity deadline, which is the end of January. So technically, some of these application routes are open until 1st of May or the end of June, but we really recommend students apply as early as possible. We are a selective competitive institution, so the later you apply, the more competitive the application process will become. We just opened our application, so we typically start accepting applications from mid-September. And so I would say September to January is that peak time to get your application in. Because again, most people apply in that period. So if you apply after that, it will just be that much more competitive when you do. But that being said, we're about the student and the quality that they're presenting. Students can apply when it makes sense for them to apply. I know sometimes students from South Africa will wait until they get their results and then apply. That's where connecting with me, letting me know, flag it that you've applied and things like that. And I can go in and let my colleagues know that it's somebody that I'm working with and that kind of thing. But generally try to get it in as soon as possible. And the other part that pairs with that is scholarships. We have some scholarship programs that will close in November. And again, our cycle opens in September. So I recommend applying early and doing the scholarships at the same time. You don't have to wait to get a decision to submit applications. Anything that we offer, you have to have applied, but you don't have to have a decision. You don't have to have accepted an offer, things like that, to get your application in for the scholarship. And then that way you don't risk missing out on anything. You can get everything lined up in one go and then let decisions come back and see where everything falls. but every year from all over the world, I see students who wait until they meet the conditions of their offer, or maybe they received an unconditional offer, but they didn't accept it right away. And then they finally make the decision to accept it. And it's only at that point they start looking for funding, and half the opportunities are closed by that point. So again, apply early and plan to do scholarships at the same time, because we do have a fair amount of funding. Most of what we offer is fee reduction, but we do have a full tuition scholarship that's based on grades called the International Excellence Scholarship, as an example. So students can apply to as many as they want or as they need. We call it stacking in the U.S. So you can stack as many scholarships as you want, and whether it's through us or it's through other bodies. So we don't limit that. And if there's an external scholarship we know about, we have it listed on our website as well. So when it comes to entry requirements, I've got IB listed here. Glad to talk about NSC or A levels or US curriculum or whatever. But this just kind of gives you a range. The entry requirements we look for will vary by the subject area. It will also vary by the year of entry. Some of our science subjects will allow students to skip that first year and go into the second year. And so you have a 3-year undergraduate experience effectively. Not all the programs allow that. So it can just depend on what the student wants to study. So the entry requirements we will look for, the minimums we will look for will depend on the subject and again, that year of study. So this is the range for IB. For A levels, it kind of depends. It usually is between 2 A's and a B and 3 A's at A level. Sometimes you might need A star if it's you're talking about second year entry. For NSC, it's 80% overall, with a 7 or an 80% in at least 5 subjects. Some subjects will be able to take life orientation, others we won't. So again, it just depends on what the student's interest is. But we have it all listed on our website. And usually what I recommend is based on the curriculum the student's studying, look up the subject, get the degree program page for the subject, say it's BSc psychology, and then cross-reference that. If you're doing the NSC, for example, cross-reference that with the NSC page that we've got on our website. And then that way, if there's any kind of prerequisites that we look for, any subjects that we need, you'll know we'll look for something comparable in the curriculum that the student's studying. And always at any point, glad to help people navigate that. But depending on the curriculum they're studying, they may need to go to the page we have that's for that curriculum and cross-reference that with the degree page. English language requirements, nothing's required at the time a student applies. And there's multiple sources of evidence we can accept for a student's English language if it's necessary. So if in doubt, the student can apply, they will decide if we need to see something, and then you can make a decision on what the student wants to do from there if we need to see any further proof. So I'll stop there real quick to see if there's any questions about applications and things like that.
I think just while people are maybe thinking about a question there, in terms of the application process, and the one thing that a lot of students should do, and this is some advice from Global as well, is start early, start that research process early. And in South Africa and Zimbabwe, you've got other agents, not just Global. But one thing Global does really well is we work with the likes of Candace, with the university admissions teams to assess well before you even have your interest, what your requirements could be. And maybe you need to do, get a tutor for your class for certain subject matters that you're not hitting the grades for. Those are the things that we can sort of help and guide with and advise, and even look at some other options for you as well if you don't have an option to apply. So don't let that anxiety build up in terms of, oh, you don't think you can make it, or you're worried about where your grades are. We all know that life takes its different choices and tolls on everybody. So please do reach out. This is real valuable information. I will share Candace's links that she shared on this presentation after the webinar with you all, with the recording as well. I know that'll help a lot of parents as well and students. Candace, question from me to you. Do you see a lot of interest in the sciences at the moment from South Africa and Zimbabwe? I know we're getting a lot of inquiries for that. Are you seeing that come through from the admission level?
We are, I think there's the usual suspects in terms of computer science, maybe physics, what we're seeing actually globally is an increase in psychology and neuroscience. As maybe as curriculums evolve and things like that. But psychology, when I started working at St. Andrews 7 years ago, psychology, nobody was going for it. And now it's one of our most competitive subjects 7 years later. And that's a global phenomenon. We're seeing it in the UK and we're seeing it in just about every country as well. And again, going back to some of what I talked about, psychology can technically be a humanities subject for us. But those are the kind of sciences I feel like we're seeing, things like sustainable development, earth sciences, marine biology. It's either a bit more specialized or it's kind of the less typical sciences that you don't immediately think of. And that's what we're starting to see more applications coming in for.
What just probably a little bit of eye opener here for somebody who's new to the process. What when you mean competitive, what do you mean by competitive? Is it a set number of students that are allowed to get into that program? Is it limited? Is it purely based on the types of skills coming in? If you just go a little bit onto that.
For us, it's there's the standard entry requirements that we have listed on our site. That's the minimum. So 38 IB. That means a student needs to be predicted to achieve a 38 to be competitive. What they might need to achieve or be predicted to achieve to receive an offer will vary by the pool that they're applying in with. If we're looking for 38s and everybody that's applying is 42 and up, then that's going to influence how we make the decisions. But again, it's never just about the grade. So I can have somebody that's predicted to get 45 out of 45 on the IB, has always been strong academically, and then their personal statement talks about whatever book they read over the summer. It doesn't talk about the subject they've applied to. That person's probably not going to get an offer. So it's very holistic in that sense. It's not just about grades. It's about having a personal statement that's explaining the subject that you've applied to, that you want to start with. And then the reference would then support that. But it really, so many times it comes down to the personal statement. And that'll be what makes the difference with who gets offers and who don't, because the grades might be there, but the statement's not. So competitive, when it comes to grades, some of that has to do with the pool, and that can change from year to year based on what we're seeing. We do typically, let's say, again, as a selective institution, most of the students who apply do tend to either meet or exceed what we're looking for. But again, it's never just about that, because it's also about the personal statement. We do have a policy to take into account extenuating circumstances as well. So it's really case by case and on an individual basis. And what we are assessing is the student's likelihood to succeed when they come. The other thing that we will do is sometimes make different offers. So for example, I get a lot of students who will apply to management or economics, and then in their personal statement, they talk nothing but sustainable development, because those three subjects are so interrelated. Or they'll apply to international relations and talk about sustainable development. So often what we might end up doing is actually the student applies for one thing, but we make them an offer for something else. Because we saw something in the application that actually said, this may be more appropriate for you based on the classes that you've taken, based on what you talked about in your personal statement. So again, it's a very individual process. It's one of the reasons why we don't have as quick a turnaround time as some institutions. Some institutions I know will turn it around in days, if not hours. But we have at least 2 to 3 people that are reading every single part of the application. And all of the applications we get. And so it just takes us a little bit of time. And so that means it's very, interrogate is not the right word, but we're not looking for reasons to reject. We're looking for the right fit, and that the student's going to be set up to succeed when they get here. So there's that competitive element too, but then there's also about it being the right fit for the student.
Yeah. I think you've answered a lot of people's thoughts and questions, as always, Candace. If you want to carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. So more kind of fun, less intense stuff maybe is the halls or the dormitories. We have the Harry Potter halls, because of how old we are. We've got more modern contemporary halls. A lot of the Harry Potter halls weren't built to be dormitories. They've been converted over the years. The more contemporary ones were built to be dormitories. They tend to be a little bit bigger. have different kinds of facilities and things like that. It's a separate application process. So you do your admissions application, and then in April, the housing application opens. Your placement in halls has more to do with when an offer becomes unconditional. So if you receive an unconditional offer, as soon as you accept that, you're then in the cycle to get placed into halls of residence. And they deliberately organize the placement process so students who don't get their results at the same time as others aren't penalized. Like A-levels, for example, doesn't come out until August. So we don't penalize the A-level students because that's when their results come out. You know, even though IB comes out in July, for example. We do ask other questions to try to help match you. The only thing you'll have in common with people would be gender and year of study. Otherwise, they're going to be from other countries, other subject areas. And so we do try to match it up in terms of morning people, night owls, neat freaks, that kind of stuff. So there's a couple of sort of this kind of personality type questions just to increase the likelihood that you'll get along with the people that you share your space with. You may have your own bedroom and bathroom, but you may share a kitchen space and living space with other people. Again, it depends on the dorm and what your preferences are. When it comes to the life, I've talked about the student government and a lot of the work that it does. We have over 150 societies or clubs. That's everything from professional groups to faith-based groups, culture groups, really fun things like I mentioned Quidditch. We have a Tunnix Tea Cake Society, but again, we've also got an entrepreneurs group, there's a medical group, and a whole range, and all of them are open to everyone. You don't have to be from Malaysia to join the Malaysian Student Society, as an example. They really are the voice of the students. The student officers, the government officers sit on the governing bodies of the university with the principal. And so they've got an active voice, an active place in deciding the direction of the university and advocating for the students. And there's all kinds of things. There's a whole calendar of events, even during COVID, of things that they were organizing. During COVID, we started a can-do movement because COVID's been so much about what people can't do. So we started a can-do movement, and part of that involved, in addition to funding from the university to support student government initiatives, it also involved outdoor space, covered outdoor space. So there's usually a little bit more flexibility when you're outside. And so it meant maybe they could do movie viewings. We had some of the earth and environmental science students do mock conferences outside in this covered space. So they did as much as they could, as often as they could. But there's a steady flow of activities to the point people don't have to leave. They don't have to go anywhere else. I've mentioned it's not one of the big capital cities in Scotland, but it is well connected. But even the local students whose families might be half an hour away won't leave. There's just enough going on between the town itself and all that the student body does and student government organizes. They've got all kinds of traditions. I've talked about academic families. The pier walks, Raisin Weekend, that's if you see pictures of our big foam fight, that's related to Raisin Weekend, all kinds of things that they do. And a lot of it they've been doing for centuries, and that's the crazy part, that you're doing something that people that graduated 50 years ago, the people graduated 200 years ago, they also did it or did something like that. So it's a real sense that you're part of a larger community. When it comes to sports, we've got over 50 sports teams or clubs. 12 of those are what we call performance or varsity level, high competition. There'll be things like rugby, football, basketball, ultimate frisbee. I think I've got the full list. Anything that's bold are going to be the performance sports, but even the performance sports will also have just kind of your casual walk on, just give it a go, get together casually and play once a week, kind of an option. I do highly recommend rugby to anybody. I picked it up when I moved to Scotland, and I know I'm kind of maybe preaching to the choir coming from South Africa, but there's all these options. And again, all of these are open to anyone at any level. You have PhD students, competing at one of our performance level sports. And the Sports Center also does things like, fitness classes. They've got personal trainers and that sort of thing. We just did a multi-million-pound renovation of the Sports Center. So we've got new equipment and that sort of thing too. And lastly, I think this may be my last, no, it's my second to last. The career support, I've touched on what the career office does. We've got a high employment rate for our graduates, employment, or they've gone on to further study. I've touched on the alumni network, connecting to that academic families tradition. It's more what I'm used to seeing as an alum of a US school in terms of how the alumni network works, where being a member of that alumni community means something in terms of helping with networking, helping with job shadowing, helping students explore different career paths that maybe weren't on their radar when they started their degrees. Anybody listening, I'm glad to also provide the link later, but we have a graduates destinations page on our website. If you're thinking about studying psychology, you're thinking about studying management, you can go and look at all degree levels and see what average starting salary is, the type of companies who hire our students. Again, we're not in a major city, but given our ranking, we do have companies who come and recruit on campus, virtually, obviously, in the COVID era. But there are a lot of companies, global multinational companies, who recruit our students, even though we're not in this large metropolitan city. So students aren't going to be missing out from any kind of job search. And if they come over as an international student, the student visa will let them work part-time during the term or full-time during the breaks, so they can stay in the UK and do 3-month internships. We also do networking events all over the world, particularly in the US. The US is actually our largest international group. So there's a lot that we do in New York and DC to help students network for internships in the US as well. So there's a lot that the students can explore during their time with us. And the last slide is about connecting with students. So if you go to the student government pages where the societies are listed, all of the officers will be listed there, but we also organize events, ask a student panel sessions that students can sign up for. And there's also an online form you can fill out, a student can fill out and just be connected one-on-one with a student who maybe is from South Africa or maybe studying the subject that they want to study and further explore it that way. And I think that is me done now. So that's the end of my slides.
Brilliant, Candace. As always, I just think it's great to have you on here presenting to all these kids in South Africa and Zimbabwe, whether you're an undergrad or postgrad. I think it's really relevant information. I can't stress enough that people take advantage of the links that you have shared there, especially the student connection one. I just think it's great to speak to people that are there and are going through it. And on that note, with the pandemic that's gone on, what is St. Andrew's focus for the new year? Is it a hybrid model of sort of style? We're going back to complete normality with the rollout with vaccines. Could you just go a little bit onto that for us?
Yeah, the plan this year, the focus has been able to support students based on what they were comfortable with doing, as well as when it came to the international students, what they could do in terms of being able to get flights to leave their country and that kind of thing. So we're maintaining a blended approach, hybrid approach, whatever you call it. We call it dual learning, but it's a blend of online, either virtual, live, or recorded content, and in person as much as possible. Arguably, even in the height of lockdown, we still had in-person teaching because our medicine students were on campus in in-person classes, because things like dissecting a cadaver cannot be done. We didn't think can be done virtually. So arguably, we've always had in-person teaching. It just depended on what the government regulations allowed. And so that's what we're continuing with. So there are still some government guidelines in terms of certain sizes of groups. So again, like first year lectures that might be on the larger size, those might be online. And then there'll be the small group tutorial size can be in person, but this will also be live streamed for those who could not or chose not to be on campus. So again, it's that blended approach, more designed around being flexible for the student. And with the flexibility, the student can change their mind. They can come in person, decide they're uncomfortable and switch back to online. They can start online and join us later. The St. Andrews has always been about the St. Andrews experience, about being in the town, being with each other. And so I think there's a desire to get back to that point, but the student sense of safety and student sense of control in what has otherwise been a very chaotic 18 months was the priority, and that will continue to be so as long as we feel like that's what the students need. So definitely for this coming academic year, it's blended or hybrid or whatever you want to call it. And then we'll decide for 2022 on. But I would imagine, like a lot of places, there's going to be some level of blended that probably stays because there's been perks that came from it. the number of students that told me they love being able to instant message their professors, within working hours and things like that. But just having that little ability, can you just clarify what this journal article was, or something real quick, as well as being able to chat with them. And the benefit of having recorded lectures, so you can go back and double check your notes, or go back and use that as part of your revision techniques and things like that. So I think there's been silver linings that have come from it.
Yeah.
So we'll see what carries forward from after this cycle, or this academic year.
Yeah, I think a lot of positives will come back into the future here as well. And Candace, thank you very much. If anybody has any further questions for Candace, do put them in the chat box or raise your hand. I'm happy to give you access to talk to us directly as well. So up to you. I know it's a Friday night and we're all itching to get up. I'm sitting in Perth in Western Australia, so a truly global conversation today. Candace, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and to hear your little one in the back end there who's grown with us on these webinars as well.
I was just going to apologize. I'm sorry.
No.
She's 4. There's no quieting. There's no mute button when she's 4. At least she's not singing operatic for us right now, because she does that sometimes too.
No, it's brilliant. It is fantastic to see it. And it brings some normality to these webinars. I know people are kind of like, oh, another webinar, but you get to see a little bit more. You get to have that conversation, learn a little bit as well. And it's accessible anytime. This recording is going to be shared across all of our websites directly with the school. So if you are a parent who is listening and you want the recording, please do reach out. You will receive it. You're able to share it. And if your school hasn't got it, let us know and we'll make sure that they do have it as well. All right, Candace. Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much. Any last words, and I'll let you close it off.
No, I think I'll echo something you said about starting early. I think the personal statement tends to be the bit that people get hung up on and stress about, rightly so. It's an art form in and of itself. So start early, get multiple people to read it, but make sure it also reflects your true voice and who you are. At no point do we want you to write something that doesn't represent the student. So I think it's about giving yourselves time, start early, and so that you don't get stressed, and you can get everything done early. So start early, building your list and getting your materials together and things like that. But to echo something my dad used to say as an academic is, at the end of the day, you also just make a decision and just do it. So don't agonize over it. If you do your research, you're going to find places that you like, that you feel like you really would be happy with, and you will benefit from anywhere you go. And so don't get hung up on, whether you get the first choice or the second choice or the third choice or things like that. You're going to be happy with where you go, and you will benefit from it, and you will grow as a person, both personally, professionally, and academically. So I think it's one more big decision you have to make with your life. And so just, start early, do your preparation, and then, everything else will work out. That was the mom, because I've got a 16-year-old too. So that was a bit of the mom. So
no, it's great. It's great. It's good to hear it, and it's good to see it as well. And I know we said we're going to let you end it on here, but I just think what you just said was so important, and especially for moms and dads listening. You're looking at St. Andrews, you're going to get that support. You're going to get that safety feeling. And Candace is witness to that as well. So Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate everyone's time tonight. Have a wonderful weekend and continue to stay healthy and stay safe.
Good night. Keep safe.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.